Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers, de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau. Now, today's guest is someone listeners of the podcast will recall from our COVID-19 special. Rémi Francœur is a native of Manchester, New Hampshire. He's currently a public relations and communications consultant in Montreal. And he is working on a book project that is getting a significant amount of attention in Franco-American circles called the Last Franco American. We'll definitely talk about. Rémi, welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Thank you. Merci.
Yeah, so now, normally, one of my first questions that I ask a guest is where they grew up, but I kind of spoiled that in your intro. So let's talk about your family then. Where are your folks from?
Well, I grew up on the west side. So
sorry, we got to specify the west side of Manchester.
Oh, yeah, it's typical west side. I'm I know two others like me of our generation that were the last to have French as our first language from first generation American parents. My father and and my uncles are from this small town called Gramai, which is, in French for grandmother, next to Shawinigan, and then the next closest thing, half an hour away from Three Rivers. So probably a lot of listeners know what that is.
Yep.
And then my mother's from Manchester. She's Franco-American.
Nice. And
her parents are from Quetzcook, right on the border, and Sherbrooke.
Well, that's very, very cool. So, I guess what brought your dad down to Manchester?
I think our family was, if not the last family, one of the last families to come down to for better economic opportunity in the late 60s. And they worked in the mills and talk about not good foresight that it's right before they last closed.
Yeah, sure, right.
All my dad and the uncles went from working in the mills to union construction, like a typical French Canadian guy.
Do you know which mill they worked at? Out of curiosity.
The Wambach.
Oh, really? That's where my grandparents met. That's awesome. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, and the Chicopee mill also.
That's where my mom works. Oh, this is a good story.
Sorry,
I clapped. Mike hates when I clap because.
Oh yes.
Yeah. That's awesome.
High five from six feet away.
No, that's very, very cool. You hit that was the two winners right there. Wambach and Chicopee. Very awesome. All right.
I feel like I grew up very typical, as stereotypical French Canadian as I think a lot of people did, but I think most people were the generation before me.
Right. Yeah, and that's what makes your story super, super interesting. So, because you grew up speaking French in the house.
Yeah.
Did you have any, friends, family we're the same age, of our generation that you knew that spoke French? Because like you mentioned, usually it was lost. I always considered myself part of the first generation that lost it, but you are the rare exception there.
Well, we basically, it's like the enclave. They knew the people that came in. Well, obviously not off the boat, but they knew the people that came in immigrated about the same years. So they these are kind of still the church-going years. So everybody, neighbors. West Side is and it's the Upper West Side. So everybody knew each other, celebrated the holidays together, barbecues, and but not American style barbecues. It would be a lot of I'd say more, jovial.
Okay.
The libations would help people start singing and dancing.
Nice. Oh, that's
I don't know of our generation, our age. I only know of two other people that are from the West Side. Three other people that grew up with French being their first language.
Wait, now, did you feel different, among your peers growing up, knowing that, you're one of three that is not speaking the same language as everybody else?
To me, so I went to so for the people from Manchester, I went to Brown School, then Northwest Elementary, Parkside, and West High School. And to me, it it was a majority of the people that were in school, so it just felt like the norm. The references, and then all the parents spoke French together, mostly, not all of them, a lot of them. So what's funny is like since moving up here, there's a lot of like family names that I didn't realize were even French, and I just realized how to really say them in French. But like I remember, talk about awkward. Like my father, when I was like 6, 7, 8, even up to like I don't know, 11, when he'd have like days off or his union was on strike, and he'd walk us to school in the morning, and then like he'd give us kisses on the cheeks, and like that was, a stark difference, cultural difference.
Yeah. So he must have been mortified as a
Yeah,
kid.
well,
That's
especially at
awesome.
that age. At that age, it
Yeah,
was.
exactly. Now,
Yeah.
did you guys celebrate all the traditions that we hear about? We got the midnight mass, réveillon,
No,
pork
yeah.
pie, goton, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, most of the people, like, we'll just say either Americanized after generations being here, or my like friends that were like of Irish descent. I'll just say like my friends that were Americanized, they celebrated like Christmas Day, or they didn't stay up as late. And I mean, our nights would start at like say Christmas Eve mass, midnight mass,
Right.
and then we'd like go until like, I mean, the adults would be up till like 3 to 4, 5 in the morning, singing, dancing, telling jokes, and
That is
playing
awesome.
instruments. And it like the only thing I can compare it to, well, actually the best thing is like if we think of like Irish drinking songs or pub songs
Sure.
or
Yep.
rebel songs, that's literally what it was, except for in French. And everybody would like sing along on the refrain. And some of these songs, I realized that our family, at least part of our family, is from Normandy, and some of these songs are like old drinking sailor songs that
Oh,
are
wow.
from that time. Yeah.
That is awesome. Now, was this the typical call and response type songs?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So great that you got that experience. Like
It's
this,
and
and to me, it's neat because, like you said, a lot of this was lost in the generation before you for a lot of people.
oh yeah. Yeah. Um and I only had like two other people that could relate to two other people our age that could relate to this. It was like I felt like I had this like I grew up in the culture, but then it was like slow. It was very much no, actually, it was very much slipping away, and we were becoming like a dying species.
Yeah, now I kind of want to hit on that a little bit because you mentioned a few times you grew up on the West Side. We've talked about this podcast before. The West Side was considered, the French side of town. There's always the joke that you needed a passport to cross the river. Were the institutions in that area? Could you still like say show up at a restaurant and hear people speak French? Could you still, when you were growing up, go to a bank or a store, or sit in a barber shop and have people speak French? Because obviously for decades that was the case on the West Side. Did you still get to see some of that growing
Oh,
up?
actually, this is so I've discovered this. Well, one, yes, growing up. Growing up was like the social clubs that barely exist now, but they're like the Rimming Club.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, the Alpine Club.
Oh yes. Yeah.
There's like two others. I think there's one that's called Le Sec in Pinardville.
Okay. I don't know.
And so there you'd walk in, and it's not really it doesn't exist that way anymore. I mean, it's like you might find a couple French speaking people, but it'd be my God, it'd be like eh, almost all French. Same thing with Chez Vachon. Chez Vachon, I
Oh
mean, there's
yes.
still a lot of French people that go there at certain hours, but not nearly as much. Oh, okay. Two other places on Kelly Street is Willie Bebo's hair barbershop,
Yeah.
who was a former he had played, I believe, for the Bruins, and right next door, it's third generation. Rivard's. It's called Rivton Shoes,
All right.
and they still it's third generation French speaking. It's impressive. But other than that, I don't. Oh, and I gotta mention, and if people are Franco Americans, they'll know. His name's escaping me, but on Orange Street is La Librairie.
Roger Lessert.
Yes, thank you. An institution, what used to be the old bank, the first credit union in the States, until they tore it down and made way for the new building. But that place, all the ATMs were in French, and you had to press like 2 for English.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
And then
awesome.
same thing with like the bank tellers when you were like in the queue line,
Yeah.
you'd the tellers would have Je parle français, and most of them did.
Oh, that's cool.
The other thing that there was most of the corner store convenience stores on the west side were French speaking, like Beaulieu's Market, Saint-Don's. Yeah, there
Yeah.
was like 3 to 4. Yeah, it's like where everybody congregated and just
That's awesome.
daily life.
No, that's so cool. Yeah, honestly, because I'm from Manch, my whole childhood in Manch, but it was funny. I never really experienced that because we didn't see the West Side very often, just growing up for whatever
Yeah.
reason. So, how did you end up in Montreal?
So I moved away for a few years to right next to Providence in Boston. And then coming back, I'd always wanted or yearned to have a pied-à-terre or like some sort of piece of property in Quebec,
Sure.
one of the regions in Quebec province. So when I came back to Manchester, the big irony is that I came back and I just felt a bit of homesickness in my hometown, and
Gotcha.
like there was nobody under like I don't we'll say under 65 at least to speak French with, and it wasn't like back when I had a high school job or right after, and like you'd encounter, I was at the grocery store or whatever, and you'd
Sure.
encounter people speaking French all the time, and it doesn't really happen anymore. It's the exception. I still believe there can be a revival like there's been in Louisiana,
Sure.
but I think there needs to be a lot more links created in different ways north of the border. I mean, we're only 4 hours apart, but so I realized, well, one, I realized that I could get my citizenship, my dual citizenship. So I got that because my father had lived in, so this is the funny part. My father had lived in the US for 39 years. He passed away in 2010. So 39 years on his green card, permanent resident.
Oh, wow.
So never got his citizenship. So that was my direct link. So
Gotcha.
I now have dual citizenship. I arrived here in December 2015. To me, it was, I mean, Montreal, it's metropolitan. It's really edgy. It's got a great music scene. I don't know. It's people are friendly, and I mean, it's got a whole different culture. I mean, Toronto, most of the other Canadian cities, I mean, they're great. I mean, Toronto just feels. I think Toronto kind of feels like a polished Chicago, and then Vancouver feels like San Francisco and Seattle had a baby. I don't know.
Never been to either of those two towns, so yeah.
So, um, to me, being French Canadian has its own identity, and Quebecois, both. So to me, it felt good. Every time I did come up here before I moved up here was like it just like nourished or fed my soul. So it
That's
just
awesome.
felt like a natural choice.
Like the way you blogged. That's cool.
Yeah,
I like that a
yeah.
lot. Now, we mentioned in the intro the Last Franco American project, and I definitely would like to talk about that. But first, what gets everybody's attention, which means it's an awesome title because people get to talking about it just on the title. Why the Last Franco American?
So ironically, in the last few months, I met a few others, a couple others, but I really felt that way when I grew, like just growing up. The older I got, the more I felt like I was the last one to even be knowledgeable of like how we grew up, our traditions, the songs that we just made reference to,
Sure.
um, which is like singing and answering and just the part where I mean we stayed up late. I mean suppers lasted longer. It wasn't just like big Thanksgiving meal, the biggest meal of the American culture, but it's done in like 45 minutes to an hour. So
Yeah.
it was more. I don't know. I'd say it was more. I know I'm generalizing here, but more jovial. But
Sure.
the last Franco, yeah, I I ended up really feeling like I could no longer really live my life, even partly in French and with the traditions. And and my Irish friends, some of them are first generation, second generation in Boston and in New England. But there's never any question of pride. There's Irish pride,
Sure.
but French Canadian or Quebecois pride. I mean, why not? I mean, we did so much. We've got the first credit union. There's so many things to be proud
Of course. Yeah.
of. And I mean, we could go on about accomplishments or just foods. All of what people think is Canadian food. It's not. It's Quebec food. It's where we come from. Same thing with music. It's very distinct. Being the last, that's the way it was the feeling, and I thought it was the last Franco American. There's a few others, but it doesn't really take away from the sentiment. And I think my dad is like the last immigrant to move down to work in the mills, and I think he moved down in 1970, mid 1970, which is really.
That is late. It's way
I
late.
just feel like I lived like an enclave within an enclave,
Yeah, for sure.
and then like a generation kind of like late because of my family. Like my dad never. I mean, he spoke just enough English to get by.
Sure.
So, and same thing with half my uncles. So I feel like it could have easily been like 20 years before that or 30 years before that.
Yeah, it's such a unique experience. That is so awesome. That's very cool. Now, first of all, why write a book? What are you trying to get across with the book?
I've never thought I had anything worth. Well, not that like I don't have anything worth writing about. Nothing that would be like extraordinarily it set me apart. I mean, a lot of people could have a story, the unique story, or overcoming hardships and so on. But I moved up to Quebec and living in Montreal, and anybody who has an appreciation, even if they weren't francophone, French speaking,
Sure.
they were in awe, and I didn't realize I was quote unquote that. Well, they viewed me as special. A huge exception. They didn't even know that this still existed in terms of being a francophone in New England and growing up with the same traditions they did. So I
Right.
realized that something needed to be written addressing the awe that like I would always be introduced with and all the questions that would ensue. And then I realized like south of the border, yes, sure, we have plenty of like books on the mills or books on the history, kind of like it's more historically based. So I figured I'd do both and address both like audiences, like invoking emotion and the pride on both sides, because people up here have no clue about how Desjardins up here, the largest credit union and the first, designed to help the French Canadian Catholics before they really could save money. Save money and like teach them whatever, design institutions for them. And the same thing, like, so the Bishop of Manchester invited, like this is not known on either side. He invited Alphonse Desjardins, like stuff like that. So that's why I wrote a book. Like, it's like we have such huge reasons to be proud.
Now, is your book in English or is it in French?
So this kind of goes into the first, like, other than being in Manchester, we and you'll like confirm this. Starting in 7th grade, we had the option of having French as a second language, a foreign language, and then in high school, at least at West, we had 3 other languages for choices. So I decided in 7th grade to finally learn or attempt to start to learn how to read and write the language I knew only orally and a lot of slang.
Gotcha.
And so I wrote it to get back to your question, I wrote it in French, but then I realized, I've never read a long book or been, I read it over after I had sent it to a few people up here, and I realized it was lacking a lot. It was not just sentence structure, but basically I added a lot of like quote unquote just kind of like juice to it, more personality, more hook. Sure. And then we grew up reading whatever, we can talk about the great American writers, authors, and same
Sure.
thing with English. But we didn't read Molière, and so yeah. So I originally wrote it in French, and then I spent like 14 months rewriting it and translating it at the same time to English.
So the plans to release in English then, the first
Yeah,
one.
yeah. But at the same time, I'm hoping to get it released in French also. And people up here are like, why in English? Because it's the whole like, proud about the language. And I'm like, I just want to. I agree. There's half of me that agrees, but the other half,
Sure.
I want to say like, well, why preach to the choir? Like you should give it, you know. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a great way of addressing both sides of the border.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, if you get it in both languages, that'd be really, really cool. All right, a couple more, then we'll get you out. But I did want to know because I'm always find it curious because we've talked to a number now of guests who have come from the states. They were, Franco American heritage, come from the states, moved up to Quebec, established a life there, and we talked about how kind of they would have been treated by the locals they ran into there and kind of their new neighbors and stuff, obviously viewed as, in a lot of cases, as an outsider, because even if they spoke French, it was clear that French was not their first language. And I'm wondering if that was different for you. That even though obviously you grew up and lived your life in the States, when you get there, you not only speak French, but you speak their French. You know what I mean? I wonder, was that different?
So what's okay? This is where it gets really where let's say listeners, including you and people that we kind of know that we know from Manchester, they'll find this humorous. And the same thing with like let's say people from north of the border will find this humorous. So I speak. Well, not so much anymore. I can go back to it. It's more like when we hear friends that are from the south that are like, oh, you can't, maybe after a couple beers or after when he's around his friends or he's around his friends,
Yeah.
Southern drawl will come out.
Sure.
So that's kind of like me, and like the old. So basically, at least the first 6 to 12 months, people would like be like, whoa, what did you say? And they're like, I haven't heard that word or expression since my grandparents. So that would
Yeah.
be like a lot of those experiences.
Sure.
Um, they were amazed that I had the same accent or very, very similar accent.
Right.
But the only thing that was different is like here and there, fairly often, especially after I moved, would be phrases, words that they hadn't heard in a long time, like from their grandparents or uncles. So that's what they found pretty funny. It's like saying, I don't know, the only thing I can think of is like, I mean, in New England, it was like how people used to say tonic or swell, you know?
Yeah. Tonic. Yeah. My grandfather said tonic. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
now it's
it's,
funny because I had a semi-similar experience because I've been able to connect with people in Quebec through the podcast, and I was talking with my buddy who was in Drummondville, and I used the word, I referred to my Pepe,
oh,
and
yeah.
he just started laughing. He's the same kind of deal. It was like, we haven't heard that word since my grandparents.
It's
Like, yeah.
true. Yeah, we even say it slightly different than they do. It's an old word.
I had no idea that that wasn't still a thing up there until I talked to him. But now it's all. It's very fun. Okay, now if people want to follow your project, they want to be able to get in line when this book comes out, they want to be able to purchase it, where can we get them so they can
So,
stay clued in?
one, I haven't found a literary agent yet. That's what I'm starting to look for in the States.
Yep,
Uh, so we're in terms of like the process, it hasn't gone to it hasn't been even been published or accepted anywhere yet.
gotcha.
So, but in terms of like I've opened up about a year ago I have RemiFrancœur.com where I've had some blogs on Huffington Post in French
Very
and
cool.
English, and then
Nice.
there's a Facebook page that's titled The Last Franco American where there's videos. There's a couple C-SPAN videos where they're talking about like the old French neighborhood and a lot of references.
That's awesome. So we got to make sure we got a link. First of all, what was that Huffington Post about?
I also dipped into, there was a big controversy in Montreal for a bit of time about how a lot of people downtown in the tourist area, Old Montreal, greeting people with bonjour hi.
Oh yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah. So, and it sounds so friendly, and I mean, there's nothing super wrong with it. There's nowhere else in the world. Like, there's more of a Spanish population in Providence than there's an English population here. And I mean, it's not like anybody's going to be like intimidated if somebody says bonjour. Like, you go to another country and you expect to, I mean, in the ensuing conversation would, sure, if they can accommodate speaking English, but like, just greet I think it's beautiful. You go somewhere and it's French is a beautiful language. Why have to greet somebody in another language?
Yeah, I thought that was a fun, interesting
Yeah.
controversy.
Oh yeah, they got a lot of attention.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Remy. This has been way fun. This flew by, actually. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us. We'll make sure to link where people can get your articles for Huffington Post, and make sure to link where people can get on that Facebook page to follow this project.
And I'm on all the social media like Twitter, Facebook. So,
Nice.
as you know.
Oh, make sure to get those out. Appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.